number of years ago, I, as a project with a dojo in Pennsylvania, the Iten dojo, wanted to distill down Aikido into some easily learned principles. And it came to me that Aikido is structured around 5 vectors. And the Aikido technique can be hung on one of those vectors. And fortuitously enough, they go from Ikkyo to Gokyo. We call them kyoku, because kyoku means a theme. So, for example, ikkyoku is anything that is a rise and fall on the vertical plane. So that only includes ikkyo, but that includes tenkan, because that's the same, if you will, a linear circle, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
The second theme is
a linear vertical circle.
Yeah. In other words,
I have to describe it, what you're doing with your hands, because people are listening to this.
Yeah. Well, if you think about
so like a saw blade, like a circular saw.
Yeah. So if you think about Nikkyo, there's all kinds of ways to do Nikkyo, but it also is the same as a boxing hook, which I learned from Kuriwa Yoshio, and it's a figure 8, an infinity in front of you, right? Which of course is not just your arms; it's your whole body. Blah blah blah. Sankyo is like an uppercut. So an uppercut is not a linear movement, it's a spiral movement. Sankyo and, for example, the upward movement of Tenshinage are exactly the same.
I'm sorry, can you just go back to the Nikkyo? You said you learned it. It's the same as a hook. Yeah. And who did you learn that from?
Kuriwa Yoshio. So Kuriwa Yoshio was a really remarkable Aikidoka. Started in the early 1950s. Let's see, a quick version of his life story.
Well, I read your book, so I know who he is.
Yeah.
But for people listening, he was also a boxer, right?
Right.
He was
post World War II, when it was just anything from probably smokers in the back of bars to things in the ring. You fought people far greater than you in weight. He was a middleweight. He was kind of built like Marvin Hagler. And he was an infighter. He specialized in hooks and uppercuts. He also was a tough kid in a very angry, desperate time post-World War II. And so he used to go down to Ginza, which we think of as a really glitzy place, but at that time was, basically just a place where people set up, little shops to sell whatever. And he's a junior high school kid going to a boxing gym, and he would see high school guys or college boys who would always be wearing their university uniforms, so he knew who they were. And he'd start just staring at them. And they'd be like, "What are you looking at?" And he'd be like, "Big brother, I'm looking at you. You want to do something about it?" He says, "Yes, I do want to do something about it." And so they go in some alley somewhere, and he'd leave them in a pile of garbage. And he would take the button off their cap, their school cap. And he said he had 2 shopping bags full of buttons of, people he beat up. And
he was training, he was teaching at Hombu so you spent time at Hombu Dojo, right?
Right.
You spent a lot of time.
For a brief period. It was
Right.
Just to finish with Kuryo real quick. He's riding on a train one day, and a guy is hanging on a strap, smiling at him. And he's thinking, I know this guy from somewhere. Where did I go to school with him? And the guy goes, "You don't remember me, do you?" He goes, "No." And he says, "You left me in a pile of garbage in an alleyway a couple years ago." And Kuryo told me that he was terrified because he could remember the face of the 4 or 5 guys who beat him up. But he said there were hundreds of people walking around Tokyo who he had shamed, and he had no idea who they were. And any one of them could walk up behind him and stab him, and he wouldn't even know it was coming.
Wow.
And so just coincidentally, he opened up a newspaper around that period, sees a little article about O-Sensei, and just says, "There's something about what this guy's doing which may help me. You need to check this out." So he joins the Aikikai. This is 1950 something, and got his arm broken almost on the first day by Kato Hiroshi, who was 17 or 18 at the time. And Kato Hiroshi's mother dragged him by the ear to Kuruiwa Sensei's mother and made him apologize. So anyway, Kuruiwa was this guy with that kind of angry, arrogant humility of a downtown boy, with, in his eyes, doing a martial art with a bunch of middle-class guys. For various reasons, and I could talk for hours about him, but he was not, after 6 months, he was like a kaioi deshi, an outside deshi. He wasn't able to attend O-sensei's class because he had to pay off one of his brother's debts. And so he would just practice alone in his room, hanging Aikido techniques on boxing movement.
Mm-hmm.
And so he refused to take a belt until he was being sent out to teach. He was teaching at the famous Sugino Dojo, and he was a white belt. And so the Sugino Dojo people were complaining that they were being taught by a white belt, and other dojo were getting, black belts. And so Toshu ordered him to take a shodan. And so he was a official Hombu Dojo teacher, didn't teach at Hombu Dojo. I trained with him at his dojo about 2 years. He had a little dojo in Ikebukuro, which is a section in, I believe, northwest Tokyo. And the heart of his technique was everything was like a nikyo, like a hook, or sankyo, like an uppercut. So what I added to those two was yonkyo. If you think of yonkyo as where you drive down and you're driving the hand downward as if pushing a sword downward almost into the ground. But we have that same downward inward spiral in the entering movement in kaiten nage, where you insert the arm, or the same movement in some koku nage, where you grab one wrist and you spiral the arm in when you're sort of bridging their elbow. Gokyo is everything coming to a single point. So what I basically did is I started teaching at the Ikiten Dojo for a while, teaching beginners these movements before I taught any technique. And what was interesting is, I was only coming out occasionally, so they would learn technique from their teachers. But because they were doing these basic solo movements every day, they had trained their brain, when I'm doing Aikido, this is the way I should move. And what was interesting is when somebody would do a technique that was off one of the lines of the vector, the beginner would spontaneously, accidentally do a kaishiwaza. Because they had learned every movement has to follow these vectors. So it was a real fascinating kind of thing.
And you have a video of this up on YouTube, right? Because I think I watched it.
Yeah,
I know I watched it.
Yeah,
so I'm going to share it.
Okay,
so people can see exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. There's one fella named Bud Yuhas, who's a good friend and a training brother of mine. He took that concept and ran with it, and he started doing his grappling based on those vectors.
Wow.
So anyway, I'll be I occasionally do some Aikido, and I will be doing a little in France. So I'm like a crazy uncle who, comes from a long voyage and drops in and shows a few shrunken heads and then.
But you went really deep into Aikido when you were doing it, because just from reading your books on it, you research. I mean, you know a lot about the history and the application. Like you thought a lot about what it is you're actually doing when you were practicing.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, it's not like you just did it for a little while as a hobby and then stopped. So I'm just wondering, like, why you stopped. Or
okay.
If it's political, you don't have to get into it, but just
no, it's not political. It's not political.
First of all, you're a good writer, so reading your books is it's like reading an actual book too. It's not just about Aikido. There's a little bit of there's literary value, not a little bit. There's literary value to it. Like I studied, even though you might not tell by the way I talk, I studied like creative writing and writing. So I recognize like literary value in it. So I'm just wondering the amount of heart that you put into it. Like, did you just kind of outgrow it, or?
It's like you fall in love with someone and things aren't going the way you're hoping, and then you meet somebody new.